Over the years, I've fished with many match rods. I don't know how many I've owned over the years, probably over 20, and I'm just talking about standard 13-foot match rods, one or two 12-footers, one or two 14, and one or two long rods, sort of 18 to 20 foot. But my standard rod has been the 13-foot rod for many years, well over 40 years. And a couple of years ago, my sometimes cameraman Richard said that he'd acquired a Dave Harrell ST rod. And these rods date back about 30 years or so, very early 90s, and they cost about £130 back then. So they weren't the absolute most expensive rods around, which were some of the Normark rods, which cost even at a discount well over £200, sort of double that price, with a full retail of sort of well over 300. Anyway, he said to me, why don't you have a fish with it? And I looked at the rod and I found there were two options on this Dave Harrell rod back then. In the West Midlands, a lot of anglers actually preferred hard chromes, and that's what the rod that he had has got. It's got the hard chromes, and someone had also sawn off about 5 inches of the handle and shoved some lead sheet up the handle to counterbalance it. Now, some people like rods like that, but I think there's a bit more of a kick. The rod then weighs more than it should do, so you end up with a rod weighing, instead of say 7 ounces, weighing 9 or 10 ounces. And you don't necessarily fish better with it. That's people's preferences. I prefer the full normal handle with no counterweighting. So with the rod that he's got, I restored the handle for him. I found a piece of handle and made a sort of spigot with some scrap carbon fibre, got rid of the loading and took it back to its full length. And you can see me here fishing on the Avon with it on one of the side streams, catching dace. Lovely rod, nice forgiving action. It's got a splice tip. And I believe this rod is the same rod, and someone can correct me, please do, that Harrison still offer a match rod called the GTI with a splice tip, and I think it's pretty much the same blank. Now, made up, this rod weighs with a standard cork handle without a screw down fitting just under 7 ounces. Now that seems heavy by the standards of some rods that are around. The Drennan Acolytes are supposedly more like 5 ounces. But most match rods, if they're well balanced, and a 13-foot rod weighs 6.5, 7 ounces, for an adult, you should be able to fish with it all day long. It's not heavy. Anyone tells you it's heavy, the reel adds quite a bit of weight to that weight anyway when you're fishing. So it's a nice light rod, and it's quite tippy. If you see some video I did this week with another version of this rod, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, that splice tip is quite forgiving, quite soft, but then below the splice there's some power down there, but there's no real flat spot or anything like that. Really nice progressive rod, and it's what I call a proper match rod. So some rods, they say, oh, it's a waggler rod or out and out stick float rod. This rod will fish a waggler, it'll fish a stick float, it'll fish a croak willow, even a bigger float. It will do all of that. I wouldn't call it a canal rod, and possibly if you were fishing really big wagglers, you might want a different rod. But for fishing with a 2.5 pound main line, fairly fine hook lengths, this rod will do it properly. Now, coming on a bit, very recently I was very kindly given the same rod that my mate's got, a Dave Harrell ST, dating back to the early 90s. This rod is different in that it's got the standard same O-rings instead of the hard chromes, which I personally would prefer. Hard chromes are good, you get less resistance through the rings, that's the argument. However, they can wear out, you can groove them, and this is a rod that I feel I might use quite a bit. It's such a pleasure to fish with it. However, as you can see, it's got the reel fit. These are plastic reel fit fittings. They move around, the handle's a little bit on the long side. And then we've just got 2 eyes on that bottom joint with a maroon whipping. And so I've decided to be very brave. What I'm going to do is fit this reel fitting. It's a Fuji screw down fitting, and that'll come off with a 16mm inside diameter there. This blank's about 13mm, 13 and a bit. It's actually 15.8mm, and the hole at that end is smaller. That's 10mm, so I need to drill that out to get it to fit on there, and I need to strip this handle back. So that's my project over the next few weeks. Take these eyes off, strip this handle back, work out the best position for this to go on here, and then replace the eyes. And this has just got varnished whipping, so I can give it 5 or 6 coats, and that's all right. It hasn't got a resin coating on it, and it should, if I do a nice job, look okay when I've finished. Got to be careful with the blank. Like I say, it's a really nice rod to fish with. Very, very nice. Got this lovely spliced tip, nice and fine. And it's very progressive. And Harrison blanks are probably their main market now. Well, not probably. Their main market now is top of range carp rods. And that's where they sell their main rods, and they do some barbel rods and stuff like that. But this is a really good blank. It may be outdated, but it's top quality, 100% reliable. Lots of people still use these rods, or the Harrison versions of them that were made up 30 years ago. I can remember Davis Tackle in Christchurch selling Harrison made up rods. I don't know who made the rods up for them, but they were made up there. Might have been Graham Pepler made them up. So that's my project, and I'm going to come back to finish this video with how I get on over the next couple of weeks, showing the different stages. And I'm hoping at the end of it I'm going to have a really nice rod to fish with. I've used it a couple of times now, fishing a light waggler on the Stour with tears, catching roach and dace both to about ½ pound, and I've had a bonus chub on it of 410 on 0.09 and a very fine wire 18 Drennan barbless hook, silverfish hook. So it can handle the bigger stuff. It certainly handled that and got it out of the weed. Didn't stop it. The chub got in the weed. The weed was dead and rotten, and although the line was very fine, it cut through it. So it's a forgiving rod, and like I say, for my sort of dace and roach fishing, I think if I was fishing out and out for chub, I've got better, slightly more powerful rods that are very good at stopping chub, things like an Avenger, Normark Avenger 2000 or a Carbotech. But it's a rod I'm looking forward to making a bit better, maybe, I hope. Looking at it with my John Allerton rod, it's quite similar. The Allerton rod is a more up-to-date blank, possibly better carbon, but not by that much. There's not a great deal of difference. I've looked at the weight, and there's probably barely ½ an ounce between the two. And I'm going to, as I've said at the start, there are 5-ounce rods out there, but are they any better than rods that weigh 6.5 ounces that have got really first-class actions? And I'm not totally convinced about that. Some of my Normarks, again, they're sort of 6.5 ounces. Top class rods, really are top class rods. One rod I've only waggled and I can't say I've fished with properly is the Browning Sphere splice tip. Very, very nice rod. And that's extremely light. But for the time being, I'm going to have a play with this rod and see how I get on. On to the next stage. It didn't take me very long to take back the cork handle and push this Fuji fitting on. I've just used masking tape to bulk up the blank. This goes on quite stiffly, so it's not going anywhere. To open up the top of the hood, which was 10 millimeters, and I needed it to about 13 and a bit millimeters, what I did is take a series of twist drills, 10 millimeter, 11, 12 and 13, holding them in a gardening glove because they're quite sharp edged. These are new drills, and just work each one at a time by hand into there very gently, and it just slowly opened it up, and now that sits there. Made sure it aligned the way I wanted. To get on there, I had to take off the 2 eyes here. I've taken those off. I've now re-whipped those back on, and now I've got a fishing rod back into normal. One casualty is that there's a heavily varnished section here with the original label, Dave Harrell Match ST, it did say, and that has got pretty tatty and worn off, coming off, and there's a whip in there. And I think what I'm going to do is just take that off and clean that up. It won't say anything. The final stage, and I'd worked out where I wanted this. I could have put it further back, but it's a question of balance on the rod. The final stage is to build this up a bit, and I want to make that diameter about 28-29 millimeters, so it's got that hump which you'll see when I finish doing that. So I need to bore some corks, and they'll be araldited onto there, and there'll be a sort of hood that goes over the top of this turning bit, and it'll be really comfortable to fish with then. And I've got to varnish the whip-ins, which won't take very long. Just do those. I don't have the sort of resin finishes. I might just use a cellulose varnish on those, and that's it. It's only been 3 hours since I did the last part when I was preparing to do this, so it didn't take very long at all. Done lots of other things in between, and it's coming on fine. It's not a job I'd want to do for a living. It's quite hard work whipping rings on when you haven't got a proper rig to do it. People who do these properly have a rig to turn the rod, and they can do it a lot quicker than I can do, and probably a lot neater. My whippings aren't that fantastic, but they do line up. That's the important thing. I can line them up through there. They're just right. It's all how I want it. So it's now almost fishable with rod once those whippings are done, are varnished. Now getting to the stage of trying to build up the rod handle on the reel fitting to get it built up with cork. Got to this stage now. We've got a Fuji reel fitting on there, but what I want it to look like is like this one, which has got a built up piece of cork, which is 3 pieces of reconstituted cork glued onto that handle, and this forms a sort of hood. So that, if you screw it down, that goes underneath that hood. So when you hold it, it's really comfortable. It's around about 28-29 millimeters diameter instead of something much thinner. Really nice. Instead of the sort of 17 or 18 millimeters, about 18 millimeters of the Fuji reel fitting. So not very difficult to do. To do that, I've taken some homebrew corks. These are reconstituted cork. Can't seem to get real cork anymore. what I do is bore an 18mm hole off centre on the corks. I don't know if you can see that. With this cork borer, which is a piece of a cut-off piece of an old landing net handle in aluminium, and I've cut teeth into the edge of it. Because aluminium's quite soft, you have to sharpen these teeth with a little file every so often. It only does 2 or 3, and then I put that in the vise vertically up and then push the cork down. It's quite hard work, and just it cuts a hole, and it doesn't really, it comes out off center like that, and it sort of follows its own route. So to get the hole nice and clean, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a half round rasp and file that down. I won't do it here because it's messy, and I also cut the pieces there on the rest of the hole with a little fine junior hacksaw, and then I can fit these onto, I've also got a round file as well, that's quite useful for doing that. Then I'm going to be able to glue them onto here, and I'm going to push this right back and push them on, and I'm going to get the edges so that they're flush, tight against each other, and araldite them the right way. Make sure I've got the hood on there as well, and it's going to come over the cork handle, the existing handle, with this I use rapid araldite, and you can take it off this again if when you've fitted it, if in a year's time you change your mind, you can peel it off very carefully with a Stanley knife without damaging the real fitting. So it's not totally permanent, not a real problem, but it will be very comfortable when I've finished. So the rod's coming on quite well. It's got its whippings have been varnished. Probably need to do a little bit more work on those. The original transfer has got damaged. I'm very tempted to just take it off and put a couple of whippings on there, and it won't say anything. But it's starting to come up as quite a nice rod. So there's the other, that's the Avenger 2000. It looks pretty grubby and grotty, but it's been used for 24 years, nearly 25 years. Had a huge amount of fishing done with it, caught enormous numbers of fish, but it's much more comfortable. I've put the reel fitting quite a way up. I could have moved it further down. I did think about that. It does affect the balance of the rod. If I have it too short there, that's not too bad for my elbow. A little bit over there. And this rod's a versatile rod, so I can use it with a waggler. So my thinking is don't have it too short. A stick float rod, you might want it shorter, but so that's that stage ready to go. The next time you'll see this, it will be fitted and glued. And then to finish off, I'm going to use a rasp again and sandpaper to shape the cork. And it's a case of take a bit off, try it till it feels right. Looking at other rods I've done to try and get the handle really comfortable, and hopefully it will be a good job. I've now cut the corks and put them onto the handle. They're not glued on. I've had to widen it out a bit, but this screws down onto it quite all right. I've checked it with a reel with a fairly short foot on it, and that'll be fine. And that's got a bit of a hood there, and I've shaped this half a cork here at the back to go over the reel fitting bit, and ready for the next stage, which is gluing. And then I have to file it down, take that right off to do that. And I've got each cork flush with the next one. We're nearly there with this rod handle now. I've glued the corks on with araldite. It took about 2 1/3 corks to fit over that, and the screw down bit screws right down in because I've cut it further underneath there. So this is going to form a sort of hood, and on the other side, to get over the bit that holds the reel there, I had to enlarge the holes on these two corks here, and to do that I use a very sharp scalpel with a new blade. Be very careful with that. So I'm about to start filing this down and shaping it, and I need to be very careful. I've got a file and rasp, so one side's a medium file and the other side's a rasp. And what I will do is I will unscrew this, get this well out of the way, pull that out, and I'm going to put some masking tape around it. I need to grip this in a vise and very carefully pad it out with some old towel or something like that to hold it firmly and do that. I can't do it sort of freehand. There's a few blobs of glue that will be a bit of a nuisance, but once I'm past that, and then I can tidy it up and hopefully it will be very comfortable. And I'm looking for something to end up about 28-29 millimeters in diameter and a parallel tube, and just tape it off a little bit at the ends, and I'll see how I get on. So ready for the next stage. Right, I've finally done this. I've shaped the cork with a file and a rasp, taking my time, trying it out, trying it with a reel. I've put a Mitchell match. This has got a shortened reel foot, so it fits a bit better than a standard one, and it really is comfortable. My finger reaches the spool easily. It's completely secure on there. There's no sharp edges because it's cork. There's a bit of give in it. Very nice to handle. Better than the Fuji as it was. Better than the real fit fittings that, while they were secure, weren't very good. I've taken off the transfer that was on here with Dave Harrell and Map. I trashed some of the varnish in trying to get this piece, the screw down piece, down onto it. So that's gone. I might put a coat of varnish over that just to clean it up a little bit. I probably need to just clean up the handle a bit, probably do that with Ajax and a bit of a damp cloth. That will come up fairly new, although it won't stay that way for long. I tend to use my rods and make them dirty. Don't worry about that too much. The next challenge might be, if I'm feeling really brave, and if anyone knows anything about this, is to take the existing reel fitting, which is a screw up fitting from my Tricast John Allerton Premier Match. Why Tricast fit those fittings, I don't know. These Fuji screw down are much better, and when I add the cork on it, it becomes comfortable, secure, wonderful to use. The Tricast one is secure, but it's just horrible to use, and people who use centre pins, which I don't, but find them awful. This fitting can be used with a centre pin. It will work. It's fine, though I'd probably change it a little bit, especially if you're sort of holding it below the pin, but it does work. So if you do know how to take off the Tricast one, how easy it is, the existing cork on this is only held on. That's double-sided tape under that cork, double-sided like masking tape, and I've only used masking tape underneath this reel fitting. It's on there pretty solid. It's not going to go anywhere. It's secure once it's on there, and there's a bit of glue holding all that bit on. So there you have it, one new fitting on it. I've left the handle. I could have moved this handle down a little bit further, made it a shorter handle, but for waggler fishing, and this rod is so versatile, you can fish a waggler, a stick and a croakwill avon on it. I prefer it a little bit longer, so I've compromised on that length, which is pretty much how it was before. Hope you've enjoyed this episode. I am braver than most when it comes to hacking rods around. It doesn't bother me in the least. Rods are for using, not. I do see occasionally people having absolutely brand new, unused sort of Normark Titan 2000s. It's never been used. It's got, the bag is mint, the rod is mint. what's the point of it? It's a fishing rod. Use it for fishing. Use it, abuse it, get it dirty. Yeah, by all means, look after it, clean it if you must after you've been fishing. Try not to break it. Use proper rod tubes. Don't set up match rods as ready set up and keep them in quivers. That's how you break the tips and knock them. Match rods should be taken down after each session, put away in a rod bag, and then in a strong tube. That's how to look after match rods. The ones I've broken in the past, I've had them rattling around loose in rod tubes. That's not a good idea. Don't recommend it. I've learnt my lesson the hard way. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode. A little bit different. And until next time, it's goodbye for now.